They whispered, "Don't invite her. She ruins events." I wasn't supposed to hear it. At 78, my hearing isn't what it used to be, but some phrases slice through age like a blade. I stood in the hallway, still holding the folded tablecloth I'd washed for their celebration, and listened to my own son's voice, calm, practical, as if discussing the weather. "Laura, we can't risk it." She starts talking, and the whole mood drops. She doesn't fit in with my colleagues. Just tell her the restaurant changed the reservation. I agree, my daughter-in-law sighed. Let her stay home. She won't make a fuss. She never does. They were right about one thing. I never did. I leaned my hand against the wall, feeling the faint tremor in my fingers. Not from age. No, that was a different kind of tremor. The kind that comes when a truth you always suspected finally shows its face without disguise. I steadied my breath, smoothed the front of my cardigan, and forced my steps to sound ordinary as I walked toward the kitchen. They didn't hear me come in. They rarely did. Laura was adjusting the ribbon on a gift bag, her lips pinched in that familiar line of irritation she saved especially for me. Arthur paced with his phone, rehearsing something under his breath. Not once did either of them look in my direction. "I found the tablecloth," I said quietly, placing it on the counter. A slight start, a quick, guilty glance. But then, nothing. "Oh, good. Thanks, Mom," Arthur muttered, already turning away. Laura didn't bother pretending. She just nodded and kept tying her ribbon. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around us. I could feel it pressing against my chest. Not the silence itself, but the meaning inside it. They were hosting a grand dinner for Arthur's 70th birthday. A milestone celebration, Arthur called it last week, when he still pretended I was part of their plans. Now I knew better. I walked to the sink, filled a glass with water, and drank slowly. My reflection in the window looked older than I'd felt this morning. My silver hair pinned neatly at the back of my head. My soft jawline. The cardigan I'd worn for a decade. No sparkles, no glamour. Just me. Simple, quiet, inconvenient. Ruining events. That's what I was now. I placed the empty glass on the counter and let the warm steadiness of anger rise. Not wild, not youthful, but the deep, slow-burning anger of a woman who has spent a lifetime swallowing her pride for the sake of peace. They still didn't look at me when I walked past them toward the door. In the hallway, I reached for my coat. Dark burgundy wool. A bit worn at the collar, but elegant in its own stubborn way. I slid it on, buttoning it with calm, deliberate motions. The motions of someone who has made a decision. If they didn't want me there, that was unfortunate. Because I was going anyway. I tied my scarf, lifted my chin, and stepped outside. The afternoon air was cool, almost sharp. It felt like something washing over me, something clean, something necessary. They could whisper behind closed doors. They could pretend I was fragile, easily put aside. They could convince themselves that I didn't notice. But they had forgotten one thing. I am old, yes, but age does not make a woman blind, or weak, or silent. Not anymore. I closed the gate behind me and walked down the street, each step steady, each breath slower and stronger than the last. Ahead of me lay the restaurant they didn't want me to enter, and the truth I carried with me like a quiet blade in my pocket. They thought I ruined events. They had no idea what was coming. I didn't rush home. Women like me don't rush. We move the way years have taught us to move. Steady, measured, unbothered by those who think age slows the mind as much as it slows the knees. When I reached my porch, the house met me in its usual silence. It has learned to hold secrets better than people do. I hung my coat on the hook, let my fingers rest on the worn sleeve for a moment, and then went to the bedroom. If I was going to walk into that celebration, I would do it with dignity, not as the quiet shadow they were used to. I opened the old cedar wardrobe. The scent of polished wood rose like a memory I hadn't invited, but didn't mind. Inside hung the dresses I'd worn through decades of family events, baptisms, graduations, bland dinners where I was thanked out of politeness and dismissed out of habit. My hand drifted past the pale blue one Arthur once said made me look too old, past the green one Laura said was too loud. It stopped at a deep charcoal dress I hadn't worn in years. Simple lines, long sleeves, a neckline that didn't beg for attention, but held itself with quiet confidence. I brushed the fabric with my fingertips. "Yes," I murmured, hearing my own voice steady in the stillness. "You'll do." I laid it on the bed. Next, the small velvet box in the drawer. Inside lay the brooch my husband, Henry, gave me on our 20th anniversary. A delicate silver branch with a single garnet at its end. He'd once said, "You deserve pieces that last, even when people don't." I pinned it to the dress. I didn't indulge in memories of Henry. I learned long ago that memories can comfort, but they can also soften you at the wrong moment. And tonight was not a night for softness. Not anymore. I carried the dress to the bathroom and studied my reflection in the mirror. The face looking back wasn't glamorous, but it wasn't defeated either. A woman's face holds the truth of her life, and mine held too many truths I'd allowed others to ignore. I combed my hair back into a soft twist. Light makeup, not to impress them, but to remind myself that I was still here, still visible, even if they preferred I wasn't. On the vanity lay the small leather folder I'd brought back from my attorney's office 2 days ago. I hadn't planned to use it tonight. I hadn't planned anything at all, really. Life at this age becomes a quiet habit of yielding, but hearing Arthur's voice, hearing Laura's, shifted something deep inside, like a lock turning after years of rust. I opened the folder just enough to see the corner of the documents inside. It was enough to feel the weight of my own decisions, the decisions I had whispered only to myself until now. I set the folder beside my handbag, not to threaten, not to flaunt. Simply because truth has its own gravity, and tonight it would be needed. The clock on the wall ticked with infuriating contentment. They'd be dressing now, adjusting ties and lipstick, laughing about seating arrangements, ensuring everything was perfect. Because appearances mattered in that circle more than kindness ever did. I sat on the edge of my bed and exhaled slowly. When did Arthur start caring so much about appearances? When did he begin looking at me as an inconvenience? When did I start accepting it? The questions didn't sting anymore. They simply existed, like old cracks in a wall. I slipped into the charcoal dress. It felt heavier than I remembered, but perhaps that was me, carrying more clarity than I used to. The brooch caught the light as I moved. In the hallway, I picked up my coat again, but didn't put it on yet. I wanted to look at myself once more before I left. Not out of vanity. No, that had left me decades ago. This was something else. Something like reclaiming my own reflection. In the mirror by the door, I saw a woman who had worked her whole life. A woman who had helped her family, not out of duty, but out of love. A woman who had been slowly, politely erased. But not tonight. Tonight, I would walk into a room where they did not want me and sit at a table they hoped to keep spotless of my presence, not to make a scene, not to shame them, not even to defend myself, but to remind them, and perhaps remind myself, that I am still a person worth looking at, worth hearing, worth respecting. I slipped my coat over my shoulders, took the folder in my hand, and turned off the lights. Outside, the evening air had cooled, brushing gently against my cheeks as if to steady me for what was ahead. I locked the door behind me. A small, ordinary click, but in my chest, something vast and quiet opened, like a door I'd been afraid to touch until now. I walked down the porch steps, one slow, certain step at a time. They thought they'd decided my place, but they had forgotten. A woman who has been silent too long does not walk into a room empty-handed. She walks in carrying truth. And truth ruins far more than an event. The street stretched ahead of me in a long, familiar line, washed in the faint gold of early evening. I'd walked this road thousands of times. To the market, to the post office, to the little workshop I kept running even after Henry's hands were no longer there to steady the wood with mine. But tonight, the pavement felt different under my shoes. Lighter somehow, though I carried more with me than ever. A bus rumbled past, its windows filled with strangers. Half their lives ahead, half behind. Who can ever tell? I kept walking. At 78, you don't hurry. You let the world rush around you while your steps remain deliberate, like each one answers a question you've avoided for years. The folder in my handbag pressed against my hip with every movement. Not uncomfortably, just enough to remind me of the weight of choices already made. It was strange, in a way. I'd signed those papers more out of tiredness than rebellion, wanting to secure what little I had left for myself and for Clara, the only soul in this family who still looked at me as if I were someone and not something. But now those papers had a different flavor. Not protection, but truth. A truth I had carried quietly. A truth Arthur and Laura had assumed I'd never use. Perhaps they believed age makes a woman passive, soft, dull. And perhaps it had, for a time. But there comes a moment when the years that weakened your joints sharpen something else entirely. I turned onto Linden Street. The workshop sat at the corner, the lights already off. I paused across from it. Through the front window, I could make out the outline of the old lathe Henry had insisted on keeping, even when newer models were cheaper and easier. Things don't need to be fast, he'd said. They need to last. Funny how that advice had stopped applying to people long before it stopped applying to wood. I crossed the street and stood at the locked door, peering inside. My tools hung neatly on the wall. The chair I'd been restoring, a beautiful walnut piece with carved legs, sat unfinished. I had planned to complete it next week, though I wasn't sure now whether I'd ever return to it. There was a time when that workshop was full of life. Henry humming under his breath, sawdust in his beard, Clara running in after school to ask if she could sand something, anything. She was the only one of the grandchildren who liked touching the wood, feeling its grain under her palms. The others saw no beauty in it. Laura said the place smelled old. Arthur called it unprofitable nostalgia. They didn't understand that some rooms hold the shape of the people who built them, long after those people are gone. I touched the glass door lightly with my fingertips. Soon, I whispered to the empty room. I'll close you up soon. It wasn't sorrow I felt. Not exactly. more like the quiet ache of letting go of a chapter that had stayed open too long. A car passed behind me, its headlights brushing my coat as I stepped back onto the sidewalk. I continued down Linden Street, the evening deepening around me. The restaurant wasn't far. 5 blocks, maybe 6. But the distance mattered less than the change happening inside me with each block. On Oak Ridge Avenue, the breeze picked up, carrying the smell of someone grilling meat, the faint sweetness of blooming jasmine, and that urban scent of damp concrete cooling under sunset. Ordinary things, gentle things. I let them fill my lungs slowly. My thoughts drifted, not backwards, not into memories I couldn't use, but into clarity. When had I first become invisible to Arthur? Was it when he married Laura, shining with ambition she mistook for sophistication? Was it when he started hosting dinners where I was seated at the edge of conversations instead of inside them? Or was it earlier than that? Perhaps years earlier, when he decided that my life, my work, my quietness, made me unfit for the image he built for himself. It doesn't really matter. Most heartbreak doesn't come from a single break, but from years of tiny fractures no one tends to. By the time I reached the busier part of downtown, the sky had turned the color of brushed metal. People passed me in clusters, dressed for dinners, dates, late shifts, each living some private story. And there I was, a woman they wouldn't look at twice, walking toward a table where I wasn't wanted. The thought didn't frighten me. It steadied me. Because tonight wasn't about crashing their celebration. It wasn't even about proving them wrong. It was about reclaiming something they had forgotten I possessed. A will of my own. I stopped at the intersection where the restaurant's sign first became visible in the distance. Warm lights, tall windows, music floating through the glass like a promise meant for other people. I lifted my chin. 5 more minutes of walking, and I'd be inside. Inside the room they tried to erase me from. Inside the story they thought they controlled. Truth travels slowly in old bones, but it arrives, and I was almost there. The restaurant stood at the end of the block like a polished promise. Warm lights behind tall windows, the soft pulse of evening music. Silhouettes moving inside with the ease of people who believe themselves admired. Even from across the street, it looked like the kind of place where they pretend life is perfect, as long as no one old or unfashionable gets too close. I paused just before crossing. Not out of hesitation. Those days were behind me the moment I heard their whispers. But to steady the breath inside my chest. The air carried the scent of roasted garlic and something sweet, maybe glazed carrots, maybe champagne. I watched a couple in their 40s step out of a car, laughing, brushing lint from each other's sleeves, unaware of the small ache their ease pressed into me. I crossed the street slowly. The closer I came, the clearer the interior shapes grew through the wide glass windows. And then I saw them. Arthur stood near the head of a long, decorated table, his posture stretched tall in that way he does when he wants to impress. His gray hair was combed back, suit crisp, a man who wore dignity like a suit purchased on sale, proudly, but without understanding its true value. Laura was at his side, laughing with her wineglass raised, wearing a sequined dress that caught the light like scattered mirrors. Her bracelets clinked every time she lifted an arm, an orchestra of attention-seeking metal. She was beautiful in the way expensive things often are. Polished, empty, loud. Guests filled the room, colleagues, friends, people whose approval Arthur chased endlessly. A small crowd at the center of the world he'd built for himself. And then, near the corner of the table, I saw Clara. My granddaughter wasn't laughing. She looked uneasy. Her fingers were wrapped around the stem of her glass, not drinking, just holding. Her gaze moved from the entrance to her father, then back again, as if she sensed someone missing. Someone intentionally missing. A flicker of tenderness rose in my chest. Dangerous. Fragile. I pressed it down gently. Tonight was not about being hurt. Tonight was about stepping into my place, whether they wanted me there or not. I walked closer, stopping at the edge of the window. For a moment, I allowed myself to simply look, letting the scene move like a silent play behind glass. Arthur gestured grandly while someone toasted him. Laura angled her body to claim more attention. Guests smiled in smooth, rehearsed ways. And Clara, dear girl, kept glancing at the door. When had she become the only one who still looked for me? A waiter passed behind the glass carrying a tray of champagne flutes, and his movement broke the stillness inside me. It was time. I walked toward the entrance. The doorman, a young man with earnest eyes, straightened when he saw me. His gaze flicked from my coat to my face with the polite confusion of someone certain he should recognize you, but cannot place. Where? "Good evening, ma'am," he said. "Are you here for the Harding celebration?" The Harding celebration. Even hearing Arthur's name spoken with courtesy felt like irony. "Yes," I answered. "I am." "Wonderful," he said automatically, stepping aside to open the door. "Welcome." I nodded, though welcome was not the word any of them would choose. The door opened, and warmth washed over me. Music, chatter, clinking glasses, the perfumed air of money being pleased with itself. My shoes touched the polished floor. The young man guided me forward, unaware that with each step, the evening shifted shape. Inside the lobby, a hostess approached, tablet in hand. "Good evening," she said with a practiced smile. "Name, please?" "Mavelyn Harding," I replied calmly. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh, yes, of course, your family." There was a moment, just a breath, when I saw something flicker in her expression. Respect? Recognition? Perhaps even gratitude? I didn't question it. Dignity doesn't need clarifications. She gestured toward the double doors. "Right this way." Before she could lead me in, a sound drifted from behind those doors, a burst of laughter, too loud to be genuine. Arthur's laugh, big, commanding, curated. I felt neither anger nor fear, only a sense of finality, like placing the last piece into a puzzle that had taken too long to solve. The hostess reached for the door handle. "Shall I announce you?" "No," I said softly. "I don't need an announcement." Because invitations are for those who ask permission to enter, and tonight I wasn't asking. I lifted my chin. She opened the door. Warm light spilled out, brushing the front of my coat. I stepped through, into the room where they never intended for me to stand, and in the instant my foot crossed the threshold, silence followed me like a loyal shadow. The silence that met me wasn't loud. No gasps, no dropped glasses, no dramatic music swelling in the background. No, it was the quieter kind, the kind that slips like a thin thread through every conversation and pulls them shut, one by one, until all that's left is stillness. I stood in the doorway, letting the weight of the room settle. Warm light wrapped around me, the soft jazz, the faint clink of someone setting down a fork too carefully. The floral centerpiece near the entrance smelled faintly of lilies. Laura's choice, of course. She believed lilies made a room feel upscale. I always thought they smelled like hospitals. The hostess stepped aside, giving me space. And then I saw him. Arthur. His face, mid-laughter, froze in an expression I had seen only once before. The day he realized the brand new car he'd bragged about buying was actually financed in my name. The same twist of shock and irritation. The same calculation flickering behind his eyes. Then Laura noticed me. Her hand, raised with a half-full wine glass, dropped slightly. Enough to show discomfort, not enough to spill. Even her panic was controlled, tidy. Other guests followed their gaze until every eye in that room was on me. Everyone except one. Clara. She didn't freeze. She didn't stiffen. Her face softened as if someone had untied a knot inside her. She mouthed one word, "Grandma." I gave her a small nod. Nothing more. My heart was not a thing to be shown in public anymore. A waiter, tall, polite, uncertain, approached me with a cautious smile. "May I take your coat, ma'am?" I looked into his young face and saw absolutely no judgment there. Only courtesy. It soothed me more than anything else in the room. "Yes," I said gently. "Thank you." He helped me slip out of the burgundy coat with reverence I hadn't felt in years. Not reverence for me, perhaps, but for the moment, for the stillness of it. He folded it over his arm and bowed his head slightly before leaving. I felt my spine straighten on its own. The charcoal dress I'd chosen held its shape well. The silver and garnet brooch caught the light just the right way. I wasn't glamorous. I wasn't trying to be, but I stood there as a woman who remembered who she used to be and wasn't afraid to be seen as her again. The restaurant manager, a man in his early 60s with kind eyes and elegant posture, crossed the room with surprising purpose. I hadn't expected to recognize him. But when he drew closer, a memory clicked into place. "Mrs. Harding?" he asked, voice rich with warmth. I blinked. The shape of his face, the slope of his nose. Yes, I remembered. "Elliot?" I whispered. He smiled, and time peeled back 20 years. Elliot Green. The young line cook who used to bring me broken dining chairs from the restaurant, back when they couldn't afford replacements. I'd repair them for pennies and a grateful smile. He'd offered to pay more, but I never took it. Young people with ambition need their money more than old women saving for nothing in particular. "I'd know you anywhere," he said softly. "It's an honor to have you here." He meant it. And that sincerity, that simple, unperformed kindness, steadied the ground beneath my feet. "Thank you, Elliot," I said. "You've done well for yourself." His smile warmed. "I owe a piece of that to you. You taught me craftsmanship mattered." Laura shifted uncomfortably at her seat. The idea that someone in this polished, high-end space respected me clearly irritated her. Arthur stepped toward us at last, his face an arrangement of polite horror. "Mother," he said in that tight, trembling voice of his, "we didn't expect—" "I know," I interrupted. A simple phrase, not confrontational, not dramatic. But it silenced him more effectively than shouting ever could. Elliot looked between us, sensing the tension. "Mrs. Harding, if you'd like, I can escort you to your seat." There was no assigned seat for me, of course. But dignity isn't about expecting to be wanted. It's about walking toward what is rightfully yours. "Lead the way," I told him. He guided me through the room, guests parting slightly, as if making room for something not loud, but unwavering. When we reached the table, Arthur panicked enough to gesture at a chair that had clearly meant to be decorative more than functional. His voice was thin. "Here, Mother, this seat is available." Before he could finish, Clara was already rising. "Grandma," she said quietly. Sit next to me. Her chair, her invitation, not theirs. Soft, but unshakable. I rested my hand briefly on her shoulder as I sat. She squeezed my fingers under the tablecloth. A secret strength passed in silence. Arthur hovered, unsure whether to scold, apologize, or pretend. Laura pretended to sip her drink, her eyes sharp and watchful. Elliot nodded to me once more, as if to say, "You deserve to be here," before returning to his duties. And there I sat. In the chair they didn't want to offer, at the table they tried to hide from me, with the quiet certainty of a woman who understood exactly what she was doing. The dinner resumed around us, but something in the room had shifted. You can feel it when truth enters a place. It doesn't shout. It simply stands. And I wasn't leaving. Conversation returned slowly, cautiously, like people stepping back into a room they feared might still be burning. Forks lifted, glasses touched lips, but every few seconds, someone's eyes slid toward me. Curious, confused, irritated, a few sympathetic, most simply unsettled. Presence can be louder than noise, and mine filled the space they thought I wouldn't enter. Arthur remained standing for a moment, as if unsure whether to sit or vanish. Eventually, social instinct forced him back into his seat. His smile was wrong, stretched too thin, like a tablecloth pulled over a stain. Laura sat rigid beside him, her hand wrapped so tightly around her wine glass I half expected it to crack. She kept darting glances at the guests nearby, gauging who had noticed what, which expressions meant judgment, which whispers needed smoothing later. She lived for impressions, my Laura. Thin air disguised as elegance. Clara, though, she leaned slightly toward me, as if making space for me in a world designed to leave no space at all. "I'm glad you came," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "So am I, dear," I answered. The waiter approached with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. His eyes softened when he reached me, though his voice remained formal. "For you, ma'am." "Thank you," I said, taking only one. At my age, you learn that small bites reveal more than large gestures. When he moved on, a woman across the table leaned in. She was around my age, though dressed more boldly. A bright silk scarf, a silver ring the size of a coin. I recognized her vaguely from Arthur's office gatherings. Donna, I think. "It's lovely to see you here," she said quietly, with a sincerity that surprised me. "I wasn't aware you were coming." "Neither were they," I replied. Her eyebrows rose, but she didn't look away. She only nodded, as if acknowledging a truth she hadn't expected to witness tonight. Arthur overheard. His smile stiffened like lacquer. "Mother," he said, his voice clipped. "I was just telling everyone about the new contract our firm secured." Laura cut in, eager to regain control of the room. "Yes, it's been quite a success for Arthur. This whole dinner was planned so carefully." "We know," I said softly. "Carefully enough to decide who fits the picture and who doesn't." It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It simply landed. Arthur's utensils froze above his plate. Laura inhaled sharply and forced out a brittle laugh. "Oh, Mavelyn, really?" But no one else laughed with her. Not one guest. Not even those who owed her favors. Silence tightened around the table, not cold, but attentive. The kind of silence that comes when people realize something real is happening, and they're watching it from the front row. Clara touched my arm gently under the tablecloth. Not to calm me. No, she knew better than that. but to let me know she stood with me. A small anchor in a room full of drifting faces. Elliot, the manager, passed by at that moment. He didn't interrupt. He merely placed a fresh carafe of water near my side of the table, a gesture so respectful, so intentionally visible that even Laura felt it. Her jaw tightened. Arthur swallowed hard, his composure beginning to slip. "Mother, may I speak to you privately?" "No." Just one word. Quiet. Final. He blinked, startled. "I came to sit with my family. I'm already doing that." Several guests shifted uncomfortably, but they didn't look away. People rarely look away from truth unless it threatens to reflect them, too. Arthur attempted another smile, but it faltered at the corners. "Well," he said, voice wavering, "shall we continue with the first course?" A waiter, trained well, took the cue and began placing plates before us. A tender beef medallion, roasted vegetables, a drizzle of something glossy and expensive. As he set my plate down, he looked me directly in the eye, nodded, and stepped back. Respect, where no one expected it. I cut a small piece of the beef, brought it to my mouth, and let its warmth settle on my tongue. I ate slowly, not to savor the food, but to steady the moment. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking myself to fit their comfort. And the room could feel it. Not loud, not defiant, just present. The kind of presence that doesn't ask permission to exist. Arthur lasted exactly 6 minutes. 6 minutes of pretending to eat, pretending to laugh at comments he didn't hear, pretending that my presence was nothing more than an unexpected inconvenience, like a spilled drink or a late waiter. Then his fork clattered too loudly against his plate. He stood, not dramatically, not angrily, just with the stiffness of a man whose carefully curated world had begun to crack at the seams. "Mother," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Could I speak to you in the hallway?" Just for a moment. He wanted it to sound polite. It sounded like an order. I didn't react immediately. Years of being overlooked have a way of teaching a woman to let others sit in their discomfort a second longer than they'd like. Finally, I placed my napkin beside my plate and rose. Clara looked up at me urgently. "You don't have to go," she whispered. I touched her hand lightly. "It's all right, dear." Arthur exhaled, relief mixed with irritation, as though he expected a scene and was grateful I hadn't given him one. Not yet, anyway. We walked through the dining room. Conversations dimmed as we passed. People pretended to look at their plates, their drinks, their hands. But I felt their eyes on my back. Curious, anticipatory, like they were watching a play that had drifted unexpectedly off script. At the door, Elliot stepped aside with a respectful nod. He didn't speak, but his presence alone reminded me of steadiness, something Arthur had long forgotten. The hallway was cooler, quieter, dimly lit with sconces that cast soft shadows on the walls. Arthur walked several steps ahead, then turned sharply to face me. "What?" he hissed. "Are you doing here?" No pretense now, no polished voice for guests, just the raw, impatient tone of a son who believed his mother should remain neatly out of sight. "I'm attending your birthday dinner," I replied evenly. "You weren't invited." "I know." His face tightened. A man panicking not because of my presence, but because others had seen me. Appearance, not substance, had always been Arthur's compass. We had everything arranged. Everything was going smoothly, and then you walked in, I finished for him. "Yes." "I did." "You shouldn't have." His voice was low, sharp, with the kind of anger people reserve for those they believe they can control. "It's embarrassing, Mother." There it was. Not disappointment. Not misunderstanding. Embarrassing. I felt the old, familiar sting, but only for a moment. Not because his words hurt, but because I realized how little he understood. "For whom?" I asked quietly. "For you? Or for the people who already know exactly who you are?" His eyes flashed. "I am trying to protect you. You belong at home. This crowd, this environment. It's not for you." "Not for me," I repeated, the words turning soft as silk. "Yes," he insisted. "Mother, you don't fit. It's just the truth. You make people uncomfortable. You say strange things. You tell long stories. You pull attention in the wrong direction. Everyone feels it." I watched him while he spoke. Watched the way his jaw tensed, the way his hands twitched. A man building explanations to protect his pride, not his mother. "Is that what you tell yourself?" I asked. "So it feels easier to leave me out?" His breath faltered just slightly. "It's not leaving you out," he snapped. "It's being practical. You should be grateful we're thinking of you." Grateful. For being excluded from my own son's life. I let the words sit between us like a dropped stone. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady and low, "I didn't come here to fight." He scoffed lightly, the arrogance returning. "Then why did you come?" For a long moment, I simply held his gaze. In his eyes, I saw everything he wanted to hide: discomfort, resentment, fear of judgment, the hollowness that comes when a person builds a life on social approval instead of love. "Because," I said at last, "I got tired of pretending your choices don't hurt." His face softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again. "This isn't the place," he muttered. "You're causing a scene." "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't cried. I haven't asked for anything. The only scene here is the one you created by deciding your mother didn't belong at your table." The hallway swallowed our silence. Finally, he shook his head, exasperated. "Just, please, go home. I'll visit you tomorrow. We can talk then. Not here." "No," I said. He blinked. "No, I'm not leaving." He stepped closer, voice tightening. "Mother, You asked for privacy," I said softly, "and I've given you that. But now I'll return to the dinner, to the seat Clara gave me. You may sit beside your wife and pretend nothing happened. Or you may sit with your discomfort. Either way, I'm staying." He stared at me, truly stared, as if seeing me for the first time in years, and found a woman he didn't know how to move. Without waiting for his reply, I turned and walked back toward the dining room. You learn something about strength when you reach my age. It isn't loud or flashy or demanding. It's simply the refusal to disappear. When I stepped back into the dining room, the room didn't fall silent the way it had before. No. This time the quiet was gentler, like the air itself had shifted, as if unsure whose side it belonged to. Conversations picked up again, but they were thinner, stretched over glances that followed me as I crossed the floor. Arthur trailed behind me, a few paces back, looking like a man caught between two doors, neither of which he wanted to open. Clara rose slightly from her chair when she saw me, her shoulders loosening in obvious relief. It touched something deep inside me, something I had guarded so tightly for years that I'd nearly forgotten its shape. She moved her chair a little closer, a gesture that said more than words ever could. "Are you all right?" she whispered as I sat. "Yes," I answered, smoothing my napkin. Quite. She gave a small nod, but her eyes traveled past me, narrowing at the sight of her father returning to his seat with the grace of someone trying desperately to look composed. He failed. Laura's expression was sharper, her embarrassment growing by the second. She leaned toward Arthur, whispering behind her hand, but not softly enough. You don't live long without learning to hear the words people don't want you to catch. Control it. Your mother? Ruining everything. Ruin. Such an easy word for people who never build anything themselves. I reached for my water glass. My hand was steady. I felt Clara glance at me again, as if confirming that I was truly untouched by what had just happened. Around the table, guests reacted in their own muted ways. Donna, the woman in the silk scarf, watched me with a thoughtful expression. Not pity, not discomfort, but something like respect. Across from her, a younger couple exchanged a look heavy with curiosity. One man cleared his throat too loudly, breaking his bread roll into nervous crumbs. The room had shifted, not because of anger, but because people sense authenticity the same way they sense weather. It arrives quietly, but unmistakably. After a few minutes, the waiters brought out the next course. Clara straightened, then leaned close so only I could hear. I didn't know, she whispered, about the invitation. I know, dear. If I had known, I would have. You were not the one who owed me anything. Her face crumpled for a moment, not in sadness, but in a kind of fierce protectiveness, the kind that borns from seeing something you love mishandled. You didn't deserve this, she murmured. Most people don't deserve the things that happen to them, I said softly. The question is what they do after. Her fingers brushed mine under the table. A quiet affirmation. Arthur cleared his throat loudly, trying to reclaim the room. We should continue, he announced, lifting his glass. Tonight is a celebration, after all. But celebration is not something you can declare into existence. It requires harmony, sincerity, things that had abandoned my son long before I walked through that door. A few guests raised their glasses, some out of politeness, some out of confusion, but none with genuine cheer. Arthur drank quickly. Laura copied him, though her hand trembled faintly. I sat still, letting the moment pass through me without absorbing it. Invisible women absorb everything, until one day they stop. From across the table, Donna caught my gaze and offered a small nod. I returned it. It was the kind of fleeting exchange between two older women who know disappointment well enough not to be shocked by it. Then Clara's voice reached me again, so quiet it barely existed. I'm proud you came. Not, I'm sorry. Not, are you hurt? But proud. A warmth unfurled inside me, slow and deep, a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. I placed my hand gently over hers. Thank you, sweetheart. The room kept moving, forks lifting, glasses touching, conversations tiptoeing around discomfort. But something essential had already shifted. I was no longer the woman they assumed would stay home, no longer the one too timid to stand where she wasn't welcome. And although no one else knew it yet, the truth I carried in my handbag, quiet, folded, unassuming, would soon shift much more than the room. Tonight, they whispered that I ruined events. Soon, they would learn what real ruin was. Dinner moved on, but not smoothly. The rhythm of the party had changed. A little offbeat now, like a song played on an instrument that's just slightly out of tune. People kept their smiles, but they slipped too easily. Their laughter rose, then thinned, then disappeared altogether when they remembered I was still there, unmoved, unashamed, uninvited. Presence is a funny thing. You take it back once, and suddenly, the room learns it can't ignore you. I cut a small piece of roasted vegetable, brought it to my mouth, and chewed slowly. Not because the food needed savoring, but because taking one's time is a language of its own, a declaration that no one else sets your pace. Across the table, Arthur kept glancing at me, quick, darting looks, like a man checking whether a fire he thought extinguished had begun to glow again. Laura didn't dare speak to him now. Her jaw was set too tightly for conversation. Pride clenched her face the way frost clings to windows. Good. Some truths need coldness before they thaw. Elliot passed by the table again. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak. He simply checked that my glass was full before he checked anyone else's. A small gesture, but it landed loudly. Arthur saw, and his face darkened. Clara leaned closer, her voice soft as a breath. "Grandma, you're shaking." I looked down. Yes, a faint tremor in my left hand. Not fear, not anger. The weight of the folder in my handbag brushed against my hip again. A gentle reminder. "No, dear," I whispered. "I'm steady. Just thinking." She nodded, though her worry remained. Sweet girl. She always watched quietly, absorbing the things no one else noticed. I wondered if she could sense what I carried with me. Not the papers themselves, but the shift that had already taken root inside me. Then the waiter came to clear the plates, and for a moment the restaurant softened. The murmur of dishes, the low hum of conversation, the kind of temporary quiet that gives a woman time to decide what to do next. I rested my hand on the leather folder. The moment had come. Not the loud moment, not the dramatic one, but the kind that begins without asking permission. The kind where truth simply taps your shoulder and says, "Now." I lifted the folder from my handbag. The motion was small, barely noticeable. But Donna saw it. Her eyes sharpened. Across the table, a man paused mid-sentence. Even Arthur's fork froze above his dessert plate. I placed the folder on the tablecloth. Not in the center, not grandly. Just in front of me, where it belonged. Clara glanced at it, then at me, confusion flickering in her eyes. She didn't ask. She trusted the silence I held. Arthur, though, he sensed threat before he saw contents. He leaned forward sharply. "What is that?" "Documents," I said calmly. "Documents for what?" His voice broke slightly, a thin crack in the polished facade. "For my affairs." A soft ripple went through the guests. Laura stiffened, lips parting with a soundless question. Her hand hovered near Arthur's elbow, seeking reassurance that he didn't have. I unfastened the leather strap. Arthur's voice pitched higher. "Mother, this isn't the time." I looked at him quietly. "It's exactly the time." The folder opened with the faint whisper of paper, a sound that carried more weight than any accusation. In that moment, the room leaned toward me, even if no one moved. I didn't lift the documents yet. I didn't need to. Their mere presence had already altered the night. People sense when consequences enter a room. I traced the edge of the first page with my finger. Steady, deliberate. "I won't speak out of anger," I said softly, "and I won't raise my voice. But I will speak." Arthur swallowed hard. Laura stopped breathing altogether. Clara's hand found mine under the tablecloth, warm and trembling. The truth was no longer a visitor at the edge of the room. It was seated at the table, and soon it would be read aloud. I lifted the first page, not high, not theatrically, just enough for my eyes to meet the printed words I already knew by heart. The document felt cool between my fingers, smooth, official, utterly unshakable. A kind of quiet power lives in paper when it carries the truth no one expects. Arthur's chair scraped the floor as he half stood, half collapsed back into it. "Mother," he whispered sharply, "put that away." I didn't. He glanced around the room, desperate to see whether anyone was watching. They were, not obviously, not rudely, but with the careful attention of people sensing a revelation approaching. Even the waiters slowed their steps. I looked at Arthur, then Laura, then the table as a whole. "You should all eat," I said calmly. "This won't take long." A few forks hovered uncertainly. No one ate. I turned the page so only Arthur and Laura could see the top line. Revocation of durable financial power of attorney. Laura's face went pale, the bright shimmer of her makeup turning cold. Arthur blinked once, twice, the way a man blinks when his world tilts and refuses to right itself. "I handled your finances," he said, his voice cracking. "You asked me to." "No," I corrected softly. "You offered. I allowed it. There is a difference." I placed the document neatly on the table. "I have withdrawn every authorization you have over my accounts, property, and decisions. As of last week, your access is null." A murmur rose from the far end of the table. Not gossip, but a soft exhale of collective awakening. Donna leaned forward just slightly, folding her hands. She didn't smile. She simply watched with the unblinking patience of a woman who understands liberation when she hears it. Arthur tried to smile, but his lips trembled. "You don't understand how complicated things are. I've been helping you." "You've been using me," I said. Quietly, consistently, with the confidence of someone who believed I would never notice. Laura's voice burst out in a strained whisper. "Mavelyn, this is humiliating." "For whom?" I asked gently. Her mouth snapped shut. I lifted the second page. Legal notice of property transfer to personal trust. This time, the silence was sharper, almost electric. Arthur reached across the table as if to snatch the paper, but I moved it out of reach without hurry. "The house is no longer tied to you," I said. "Neither are the workshop rights. Both have been placed in a protected trust under my control." "For how long?" Arthur demanded, panic creeping into his tone. "For as long as I live," I answered. "And after that, for someone who has earned my trust." Clara's fingers clenched around mine under the table. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I felt her breath catch. Laura stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You're doing this to punish us." "No," I said. "Punishment requires anger. I am simply correcting an imbalance." The room seemed to inhale. I lifted the third and final document, a thinner paper, but somehow the heaviest of them all. Establishment of the Clara Harding Educational and Housing Trust. Clara gasped softly. It wasn't dramatic. It was the sound of someone accidentally receiving back a piece of themselves they'd forgotten they'd lost. Arthur looked at the page, then at me, then at Clara, as if trying to understand how the world had rearranged itself without his permission. "You're giving everything to her?" he whispered. I turned toward Clara, finally meeting her wide, stunned eyes. "No," I said gently. "I am giving what is mine to someone who has treated me not as a burden, but as a person." Clara covered her mouth with trembling hands. "Grandma, I didn't ask." "I know," I said. That is why you receive. The moment settled over the room like soft dust. Quiet, unmistakable. Arthur's voice broke open, raw and desperate. You blindsided us. No, I replied. You blinded yourselves. I gathered the documents, slid them back into the folder, and closed it. No need for emphasis. Truth, once spoken, does not need to be repeated. Finally, I looked at my son. Truly looked at him. You chose a night without me, I said softly. But you built a life without me long before tonight. I am simply stepping out of the role you assigned me. I placed the folder into my handbag with slow, steady care. That, I finished, is the only announcement I came to make. The room did not erupt. It didn't need to. What entered now was not noise, but a silence so full, so absolute, that nothing in Arthur's celebration could fill it again. Arthur stared at me as if I'd spoken in a language he'd never learned. Not confusion. No, that would have shown innocence. This was something sharper. The recognition of consequences arriving at last. The air around him thinned. His chest rose too quickly. His fingers twitched on the edge of the tablecloth. Mother, he rasped, you can't be serious. Laura leaned toward him, panicked. Arthur, do something. Do what? I asked softly, turning my gaze to her. Undo my choices? Rewrite my signature? You've both made a habit of assuming I cannot think or act for myself. Tonight is your correction. Her eyes narrowed, brimming with offended pride. You're being cruel. No, I replied. I am being clear. The distinction landed heavily. The guests sat frozen in that peculiar way people do when they know they shouldn't listen, but cannot imagine looking away. Forks stilled. Glasses hovered midair. Even the music from the overhead speakers felt quieter. Arthur finally pushed back his chair, standing with the gracelessness of a man who had never learned how to rise without the world helping him. You blindsided us, he repeated, voice cracking again. You didn't talk to me. You didn't let me explain. I have listened to your explanations for years. I folded my hands in my lap. They never changed the outcomes. You're cutting us out of your life, he said. Just like that. No, I said. You cut yourselves out a long time ago. I'm only acknowledging it. His mouth opened and closed, searching for arguments, for excuses, for a version of the story where he remained the righteous son and I remained the forgettable mother. Laura rose, too, gripping the back of her chair. You're trying to embarrass us in front of everyone. I met her eyes steadily. You embarrassed yourselves the moment you decided that an aging woman ruins your celebrations. A faint shock passed through the guests. Not outrage, not sympathy, but recognition. People understand more than they admit. Arthur dragged a hand down his face. This isn't fair. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the responsibilities. Arthur, I said quietly, you haven't asked about my responsibilities in years. He went still, not because he cared, but because truth pierced places even pride cannot shield. Clara rose at last. She didn't look at her father. Her eyes were on me. Grandma, she whispered, you don't have to explain anything. Not to them. Not tonight. Her voice was steady, though her breath trembled. I felt my throat grow tight, not from emotion, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being defended. Laura scoffed. Of course you're siding with her. This benefits you. Clara turned to her, something fierce sharpening her features. You left her out. You lied to her. And when she walked in, you were ashamed of her, instead of ashamed of yourselves. It was the first time I had ever heard my granddaughter raise her voice. Arthur flinched. "You don't understand how complicated this is," he muttered. "It isn't complicated," Clara said. "It's cruel." Laura's face flushed, a deep, blotchy red. "We didn't want drama tonight." "Then you shouldn't have created it," I answered. Silence wrapped us again, tighter, but not suffocating, clarifying. Finally, Arthur's voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for me, though the table heard every strained syllable. "So, that's it? You're turning your back on us?" I leaned forward slightly, the way women do when they want their words to land precisely where they're meant to. "I'm turning my back," I said, "on the version of family where I am useful, but not loved. Present, but not wanted. Alive, but not seen." His eyes widened, not with understanding, but with the dawning horror of someone realizing the well they expected to draw from has gone dry. "You destroyed this night," he whispered. "No," I said. "I revealed it." And that was the truth beneath everything. A night built to look beautiful, but rotten underneath. The waiter appeared quietly at the far end of the table, as if afraid his footsteps might fracture the moment. He stood still, hands folded, waiting for me to signal whether I needed anything. I didn't. I smoothed my napkin once more, then placed it neatly beside my plate. Arthur stared at me, breathing too fast. Laura's fingers dug into her chair. Clara slipped her arm around mine. The celebration had ended the moment I walked in, and the reckoning had just begun. I rose slowly, not because my legs protested, though they did, as they always do, but because leaving a moment like this deserves care. Not haste, not drama, just a quiet, steady rise. Clara stood with me. Her hand slipped instinctively around my arm, warm and protective in a way no one expects from the young toward the old. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was an anchor. Around us, chairs creaked softly as guests shifted, unsure whether they should stand, look away, pretend this was nothing, or pretend it was everything. People rarely know how to behave around truth. I looked once more at Arthur. His face was a strange mix of stubbornness and panic, pride fighting with fear. He looked like a man who had lost something but didn't yet understand what it was, control or comfort, or the version of me he'd always counted on. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice rough. "Home?" I said. He blinked. "Now?" "Yes. There's nothing more to say here." Laura shot to her feet. "You're walking out? After this?" "No," I answered. I walked in. That was the important part. A murmur swept the table, the kind of soft, involuntary sound people make when something lands true, even in their own chests. I reached for my coat on the back of my chair and slipped it over my shoulders. The burgundy fabric settled around me like a familiar friend. I smoothed the collar, fastened the top button, and felt the weight of the night fall away just slightly. Clara squeezed my hand. "Let me drive you." I shook my head gently. "Stay. You don't need to follow me out of your father's celebration. It stopped being his celebration the moment they lied to you," she whispered. Her words warmed something inside me, something I had nearly forgotten could be warmed. But I placed my hand, softly, over hers. "You have done more tonight than you know. That's enough." Reluctantly, she sat, but her eyes followed me with a loyalty I did not deserve and yet could not refuse. I stepped away from the table, and Elliot, the manager, appeared almost instantly. "Mrs. Harding," he said softly, "allow me." He walked at my side, not leading, not guiding, just accompanying. A gesture of respect. One of the few I had received tonight. As we reached the doorway, he leaned closer. You carried yourself with more dignity than anyone in that room. I looked at him. Dignity is the only thing no one can take unless you hand it over. His eyes softened. Then you never lost it. He pushed open the door. Cool night air rushed in, crisp, clean, far more honest than anything inside that polished dining hall. It slipped across my cheeks, almost tender. I stepped out. Behind me, the door closed with a muted thud, sealing the noise, the tension, the fractured celebration inside. A bubble of a world I no longer needed to breathe in. For a moment, I simply stood there at the top of the stone steps. The restaurant's warm light glowed behind me, but the night stretched wide ahead, calm, dark, unjudging. I hadn't realized how heavy the room had felt until I left it. I walked down the steps, one careful foot at a time. My joints complained, as they always did, but I barely noticed. The cool air wrapped around me like something earned. Halfway across the parking area, a soft patter touched my face. Rain. Thin, quiet. Hardly more than a mist. The kind that settles on your skin rather than falls from the sky. It felt like the world exhaling. I paused and tipped my head back slightly, letting the droplets kiss my forehead, my cheeks, the silver strands of my hair. You don't forget yourself all at once. You return to yourself in small, patient steps. A few cars passed on the road, headlights slicing briefly through the wet air. No one looked twice at me, an old woman on a dark sidewalk. And yet, for the first time in a long while, I felt entirely, silently present. I reached for my handbag. The documents inside were no longer heavy. They had done their work. I turned toward the street, beginning the walk home. My steps slow, my breath steady, my heart strangely light. Behind me, the restaurant lights blurred softly in the drizzle. Ahead of me stretched the quiet path of a woman who had finally stopped asking where she belonged, because she had already decided. The walk home felt shorter than it ever had, though my legs moved no faster than usual. Perhaps distance shrinks when you no longer carry someone else's expectations on your back. The drizzle softened into a fine mist, settling on my coat, my hair, the leather of my handbag. I didn't bother to shield myself. Some nights, letting the sky touch you is a kind of cleansing. My house greeted me the way only old houses can. Quiet, steady, familiar without demanding anything in return. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it gently behind me. No slam, no drama. Just a small, certain click. The living room lamps cast a warm, amber glow over the furniture I had cared for through decades, chairs I'd restored, tables Henry had built. Each piece held a memory, but none clung to me. Not tonight. I hung my coat, towing off my shoes with a sigh that belonged more to relief than fatigue. Then I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. The flame hummed softly. I leaned on the counter, letting the warmth rise. Only then did the stillness around me settle enough for thought to take shape. I had not planned to change my life tonight. But something inside me had already made the decision long before I put on my coat. When a woman reaches my age, she knows the difference between anger and clarity. Tonight had been clarity, the sharp, honest kind that leaves no room for excuses. The kettle whistled. I prepared my tea, carried the cup to the small, round table by the window, and sat down. Outside, The rain traced slow lines down the glass, the street shimmering beneath the lamplight. I wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat seep into my fingers. Across the room sat the little leather folder, its clasp closed neatly. It no longer felt like armor. It felt like completion. I reached for the second envelope, the one my attorney had given me after we finished the trust paperwork. "When you're ready," she had said, "call me. Then we'll finalize the sale of your workshop." At the time, I wasn't sure when ready would come. Now I knew. I pulled my phone toward me and dialed her number. It rang twice. "Mrs. Harding?" Her calm voice answered. "Yes," I said. "It's time. Go ahead with the sale." "Are you certain?" "I've been certain longer than I realized." "Very well. I'll process everything in the morning." I thanked her and hung up. Another quiet click. Another weightlifting. The workshop would go to someone who needed it more than a memory. I would take what remained of its worth and build something new for myself, someplace small and soft near the sea, a place with morning light and quiet evenings, where no one expected me to fit into their picture. I finished my tea in slow sips, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. Then I rose, crossed the room, and pulled a small suitcase from the closet. The wheels rattled faintly on the wooden floor as I set it by the bed. Not to flee, not to make a point, but because a woman who has reclaimed her dignity should not stay standing in the ruins of the life she outgrew. I opened the suitcase and folded the first blouse. Tomorrow, I would pack the rest. Tonight, it was enough to begin. I didn't rush the packing. The suitcase lay open at the foot of the bed, half filled with clothes folded more neatly than anyone but me would ever appreciate. A soft cardigan, 2 long skirts, the scarf Henry once bought me at a market stall, insisting the color suited my eyes. I held it for a moment before placing it inside, not out of sentiment, but respect. Some things travel with you not because you need them, but because they remind you you've lived. I moved slowly around the room, choosing what belonged in the next chapter and what could remain as part of the last. The house felt quieter tonight, but not empty. It felt released, as though it too had been waiting for me to loosen my grip on the life I'd stayed inside out of habit rather than hope. When my joints began to complain, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The night pressed softly against the windows, the streetlights turning the rain into thin silver threads. I breathed in deeply. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I kept in my dresser drawers. Nothing about this night felt dramatic. It felt right. A woman does not always know the moment she begins to reclaim herself. Sometimes it's a whisper, a shift, a slow awakening. Sometimes it's the sound of a chair being pulled out for you by the one person who still sees you. Sometimes it's the way you straighten your spine in a doorway and realize you are no longer afraid of who is watching. I turned off the lamps one by one, each click soft and final. In the living room, the shadows settled around the furniture like old friends. I paused by the workshop ledger, the one where I'd kept notes for decades, and laid my hand on its worn cover. "You did good work," I murmured. "So did I." I didn't need to take it with me. Some chapters are honored best by being closed. When I returned to the bedroom, the suitcase waited with patient certainty. I zipped it halfway, leaving room for the things I'd add in the morning. I changed into my nightgown and smoothed the blanket before slipping into bed. The sheets were cool, the pillow familiar. My body ached in the quiet way it always does. Age is an honest companion, even if not a gentle one. But my mind felt lighter than it had in years. I lay there in the dimness, listening to the soft patter of the rain against the siding. The house didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a place I had completed, the way you complete a long piece of work and set your tools down with a steady breath. Leaving would not be abandonment. It would be continuation. I closed my eyes. No replaying of Arthur's words. No bitterness toward Laura. No trembling regret. Just a long, slow exhale. The kind a woman releases only when she has finally stopped apologizing for her own existence. Sleep came quietly, without resistance. For the first time in many years, I drifted into it without worry, clawing at the edges of my mind. And the rain kept falling, soft and steady, as though the night itself were blessing the simple truth. Some endings do not wound. Some endings set you free. I woke before dawn, the room still wrapped in a muted blue-gray hush, the kind of morning light that doesn't rush in but waits patiently at the edges, as if seeking permission to touch the walls. I lay there for a moment, listening to the faint settling sounds of the house, the old wood adjusting to the cool air, the pipes humming their quiet song. For years, mornings like this felt heavy, a reminder of routines that belonged more to obligation than to living. But today, the stillness felt different. Not a weight, a clearing. I rose slowly, feeling the familiar tug in my knees, the soft ache in my wrists. Age greets you every morning whether you invite it or not. I've learned to greet it back with a small nod of respect. We've come to understand each other. In the kitchen, I set the kettle on the stove and moved to the window. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, leaving the world washed and softened. Drops clung to the railing, catching the first hints of sunlight. The street was quiet. A single sparrow hopped across the driveway, pecking diligently at something only it could see. My tea steamed in the cup as I sat down. The warmth seeped into my palms, familiar and grounding. On the table beside me lay the suitcase, zipped now, ready. Not crammed, not bursting, just holding what I chose to carry forward. The rest could stay behind. Memory travels lighter when you stop dragging the parts that bruise. I sipped slowly, letting the heat settle in my chest. My mind drifted to last night. The restaurant, the looks, the silence that followed me like a shadow with its own heartbeat. But none of it stung now. It all felt like something that had happened to a woman I used to be. That woman had done what she needed to do. This morning belonged to someone new. The phone buzzed on the table. A soft vibration. Hesitant. I glanced at the screen. Clara. I answered on the third ring. Grandma? Her voice was gentle, careful, as though afraid I might still be hurting. Yes, dear. Are you all right? I looked out the window at the damp street, the cleaned edge of the sky, the small, brave sunlight pushing through. I am, I said. Better than I've been in a long time. She was quiet for a moment. Then softly, I meant every word I said last night. I know. I don't want you thinking you're alone. A warmth spread through me that no tea could imitate. I'm not alone, I said. Not anymore. She exhaled. A breath filled with relief and something deeper. Something like love. Will you tell me where you're going? She asked. When it's time, I promised. And if you have a free weekend, maybe you can visit. I will, she said quickly. I will. After we hung up, I closed my eyes briefly, letting the echo of her voice settle inside me like a small flame. I finished my tea, washed the cup, dried it, placed it back on the shelf. Then I rolled the suitcase to the door. The wheels hummed softly against the floorboards. I slipped on my coat, buttoning it all the way to the top. The morning air had sharpened. Even the house felt it. At the doorway, I paused. Not to look back. I had done that enough in my life. Just to breathe. One long, steady breath. Then I opened the door. Sunlight spilled across the porch, golden and clean. The world beyond it felt wide, unclaimed, waiting. I stepped outside, pulling the suitcase behind me. The latch clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt more like a beginning than an ending. The street was quiet, but not empty. My life was quiet now too, but far from empty. Sometimes we wait too long for someone else to open a door for us. Sometimes we forget we've always had the key. I walked down the porch steps. Slow, certain, free. And if you're reading this, if any part of you recognizes the small, persistent ache of being unseen, let a quiet truth reach you the way it reached me. You don't need permission to reclaim your place in this world. You don't need applause to honor your own worth. You don't need to wait for the right moment. You are the moment, and it's time to step into it.